Among the main trio in Demon Slayer Kimetsu no Yaiba, there is only one character who serves not only as a foil, but also as an unlikely friend. His storyline, like Zenitsu's, comes full circle during a fight that isn't only to the death, but is also cathartic. Someone who, over time, grows to fully embrace his humanity. With this video, we'll be going over the history of Inosuke Hashibira. Inosuke's story begins within the Paradise Faith cult. His mother Kotaha fled her abusive husband and took shelter with the upper moon demon, Doma. Doma was the leader of the Paradise Faith cult. Here, Kotaha sees Doma as someone she can trust, someone who can protect her and her baby Inosuke. However, Kotaha eventually discovers that Doma eats his followers. In response, she tries to leave but ends up lost in the woods. While on a cliff, Doma catches up to her. With tears in her eyes, Kotaha makes the difficult decision to drop baby Inosuke into the river below. Miraculously, Inosuke survived and ended up being raised by boars. Sometime later, Inosuke, in his strong-headed nature, fought a demon slayer and stole his sword. He also learned about Final Selection and demons in general. And interestingly enough, he decided to take on Final Selection without the help of a master, which is pretty much a standard for Demon Slayer, which is only made all the more impressive as, according to Zenitsu, Inosuke was the first to climb the mountain and the first to descend it. In terms of the narrative, however, Inosuke was first seen at the Drum Demon Mansion, and we may presume that, like Zenitsu and Tanjiro, he was probably assigned to deal with the demons within. Here, he crashes into Tanjiro and is immediately brash, aggressive, and hot-headed. He does, after all, immediately try to attack Tanjiro despite a demon being in front of them. The two are then interrupted by the demon Kyogai, who uses his blood demon art to transport them. This disorients an already exhausted Inosuke, as he had been trapped inside the mansion for 3 days. He does eventually make it outside along with Zenitsu. Now from there, immediately Inosuke senses a demon within Tanjiro's box and beats Zenitsu for protecting it. But Tanjiro thankfully interrupted them, and Inosuke yet again wanted to fight him. Tanjiro does make an attempt to talk Inosuke down, but this ultimately results in a brawl between the two. A pretty spectacular swordless clash between the both of them that served to encapsulate the wildness of Inosuke's fighting style, which was ended when Tanjiro resorted to headbutting and breaking Inosuke's ribs. And Inosuke, despite this, does try to continue putting up a fight, but ultimately faints. And interestingly enough, once unmasked, Inosuke's face is the complete opposite of his personality. He is loud and obnoxious, but his face, it is delicate and soft. Facial features that go on to be very meaningful for the remainder of his story. Now, after he wakes up, Inosuke assists in burying the victims of the mansion. He tags along with Tanjiro and Zenitsu to a wisteria-crested home. During their walk, Inosuke not only starts the running gag of mispronouncing names, but he also reveals his only passion: to match his strength against others. Even early on, Inosuke is headstrong and has a fighting spirit. He didn't join the Demon Slayer Corps out of grief or a desire for revenge, but simply to fight strong opponents. It's a rather simple goal that really plays into the innate animalistic instinct Inosuke thrives off of. But anyway, while recovering at the wisteria-crested home, Inosuke does everything in his power to annoy Tanjiro, such as stealing his food, to which Tanjiro only responds with kindness, which seems to further irritate Inosuke. Eventually, the trio leave and are assigned to Natagumo Mountain. Nighttime falls as they arrive, and Inosuke and Tanjiro venture into the mountain, leaving a frightened Zenitsu. At first, they are met with a fellow swordsman, who is then quickly whisked into the mountainside. They venture further into the mountain and come across massive spider webs. Not long after entering, Inosuke and Tanjiro come across another core member who claims his party of 10 started attacking each other randomly. The two slayers come to realize these swordsmen are being controlled by a female demon. Inosuke and Tanjiro are forced into combat with the puppeteered core members. The pair resolve to find the demon controlling them, which leads Inosuke to use a rather bizarre technique: beast breathing, 7th form, spatial awareness. He senses disturbances in the air. This allows Inosuke to pinpoint the female demon, despite being nowhere near her. But as such, both swordsmen begin to head towards her location. En route, they're met with several other core members. The demon controlling them is desperate now, moving their bodies unnaturally enough for their bones to break. The two members begging to be killed. Inosuke immediately agrees to end their suffering, but Tanjiro stops him. And one could argue that due to his upbringing, Inosuke lacks the emotional intelligence to truly understand death at this point. This is seen earlier when he asks why they're burying the dead. Grief isn't something he understands at first. That being said, the two are ultimately unable to save their fellow swordsman. They continue in search of a demon, but instead find a helpless corpse used as a puppet. Without coordinating with Tanjiro, Inosuke engages the creature. He receives several cuts in the process, however the pair are able to work together and defeat it. Inosuke then throws Tanjiro, which allows him to behead the demon puppeteer. At this point, it is clear Inosuke has bad wounds. Inosuke though proclaims his health. Even with crossbody slashes, Inosuke maintains an air of toughness. Regardless, another demon appears before the two slayers, this one being massive in size. The demon claims to be the father to the family of demons on the mountain. This father demon separates Tanjiro and Inosuke. Originally, Tanjiro tells Inosuke that the demon is one of the 12 Kizuki. This is however proven to be false later on. Now alone, Inosuke attempts to take on the gigantic demon. He hides until he realizes that he's only trying to survive until Tanjiro returns. But being self-sufficient to the 9th degree, this enrages Inosuke enough for him to charge the father demon. Inosuke slices off 2 of the demon's arms, but it retreats to transform into a stronger form. Oddly enough, Inosuke trembles at the sight of this demon. It's perhaps the first time he shows any visible fear. Up to this point, he had been an impulsive, animalistic demon slayer who took on any monster head on, yet he visibly shakes here. He steels himself by remembering Tanjiro's words. It's rather telling that he originally viewed Tanjiro as a rival, but now thinks on his words for moral boosting. The encouragement being enough to rouse Inosuke to action. However, unfortunately, he is simply no match for the father demon. The demon almost chokes Inosuke to death, the latter experiencing flashbacks of his fragmented, tragic past. Again, his storyline is so overreaching that it is something that is hinted at even early on. But Inosuke is saved by Gyu Tomioka, thankfully. This is one of the first instances in which Inosuke shows emotion beyond anger or excitement. He looks to Gyu with this particular admiration. It's once again one of the early signs of Inosuke's humanity. Regardless, Inosuke hasn't lost his fighting spirit and challenges Gyu to a duel. And obviously the Water Hashira noticed how severely injured Inosuke was. And before Inosuke could even realize, Gyu had tied him up, much to his discontent. And I have to say, it is pretty admirable how Inosuke doesn't seem to run out of steam. I mean, even after receiving some deep cuts and getting thrown around by a giant demon, he still tries to take on a Hashira. His fighting spirit is never truly extinguished, and that is something that clearly plays into his final fight. But due to this fight, Inosuke suffers a badly injured throat. He began his rehabilitation and training alongside Zenitsu and Tanjiro. Seeing how well Zenitsu does at first only spurs Inosuke's competitive nature on. However, Inosuke is eventually stumped in reflex training with Kanao, and during this time at Butterfly Mansion, he managed to master total concentration breathing. While there, his repaired Nichiren blades were delivered, followed by him immediately chipping the blades with a rock. This greatly horrified Tanjiro, and more importantly, the swordsmith who forged the Nichiren swords for him. In fact, Tanjiro had to hold the swordsmith back because Inosuke insisted that chipping them made the swords better. What was for me one of the funniest moments in this series. Afterwards, he sets off with Tanjiro and Zenitsu to the Mugen train. Being raised by literal boars, Inosuke is shocked by this gigantic steam-powered machine. He tries to headbutt it at first, clearly wants to best what he assumed to be a powerful beast. This unusual behavior drawing the attention of the local authorities, but the trio are able to board the train regardless. Inosuke's behavior here is another look into how different his upbringing was from the others, and one could argue that his life was similar to Tanjiro as both slayers live rurally, but Inosuke was deprived of basic human experiences. If anything, his adventures with Tanjiro and Zenitsu are quite possibly the most humanizing experiences he has had. That Tanjiro and Zenitsu, he volunteers to aid the Sound Hashira, Tengen Uzui, in the entertainment district. At first, Inosuke tries to emulate Tengen. Tengen introduces himself as the god of festivals, while Inosuke introduces himself as the god of the mountain. The Sound Hashira is clearly perturbed by this, but does explain why the trio are going into the entertainment district. Tengen's wives have gone missing, and so the trio will be needed to go undercover. However, during this explanation, Inosuke blatantly asks what if Tengen's wives are already dead, to which Tengen punches him, knocking him unconscious. Later on, the group finally arrive in the district. Each slayer is disguised as a girl in order to spy on the brothels, and as opposed to the others, Inosuke is actually handpicked by the Ogimoto house. and this is because he is actually quite pretty. There he begins his investigation and finds out that Makio, one of Tengen's wives, hasn't left her room the entire day. Inosuke wants to press further for information but is unable to speak due to his deep voice. He does listen outside of Makio's room though. The demon within notices his presence and escapes within the ceiling as Inosuke goes on to give chase. Regrettably, he does lose track of the demon though. Afterwards, he meets up with Tanjiro as they wait for Tengen and Zenitsu. Inosuke explains what happened at the Ogimoto house, giving exciting descriptions. Tengen arrives without Zenitsu and informs the pair that Zenitsu won't be present. He also mentions the two slayers may now be in danger. Because of this, Tengen tells Tanjiro and Inosuke to leave so he can continue the mission alone. However, both Inosuke and Tanjiro resolve to save Tengen's wives and Zenitsu. Inosuke waits for Tanjiro to finish his investigation only to get impatient. He decides to commence the mission without Tanjiro. While inside the Ogimoto house, Inosuke finds what he dubs a demon nest. Now only his head fits, so the swordsman dislocates his joints and enters the tunnel. He travels through it until he reaches a main cavern. This ability to warp his joints is bizarre to say the least, but would fit in with his mountainside lifestyle. In the cavern, Inosuke discovers obi draped throughout the area. Upon further inspection, he realizes that people are trapped within the fabric, one of them being Zenitsu. He tries to wake them up, but instead startles the obi. The obi demands to know why he is there. Obviously, Inosuke replies by attacking the obi, freeing those stuck within. The obi begins to panic at this, but Daki, upper rank 6 mind you, takes control of the obi and orders it to take Inosuke alive. Inosuke struggles with the obi until Makio and Suma, Tengen's wives, provide assistance. Being Inosuke, he reluctantly agrees to the aid. Zenitsu also joins the fight, and his ability is enough for Inosuke to be amazed. The sound of Shira also lends a hand. However, the obi manages to escape. Tengen follows it, leaving Zenitsu and Inosuke in the dust. The pair do manage to catch up to Tengen, arriving in a very comic manner. Tanjiro asks them to help Tengen while he puts Nezuko away. Yet again, Inosuke mimics Tengen, saying that he'll be really flashy. He fights Daki with Zenitsu. The two swordsmen are very visibly injured but still persevere. During their battle, Zenitsu relays some key information to Inosuke. In order to defeat Daki and her brother Gyutaro, the slayers mustn't let their heads reconnect. To this, Inosuke is once again amazed by Zenitsu. They ask for Tanjiro's help, and the trio take on Daki. Zenitsu and Tanjiro protect Inosuke as he goes in for the kill. Inosuke is successful but comments that they must act quickly. This fight isn't such a major turning point for his character like the Spider family was, but it does show how greatly Inosuke has evolved. He participates in teamwork without bemoaning it, and is rather encouraging of his own teammates. He's slowly enriching his own humanity, but of course he does have that one final fight that will fully allow him to regain who he was. Anyway, Inosuke holds Daki's head to prevent her from regenerating. She tries to put up a fight but is ultimately saved by Gyutaro, who impales Inosuke. And Inosuke promptly falls to the ground, much to a horrified Tanjiro. And I won't lie, this scene is perhaps the most concerned I have ever been for Inosuke's well-being. The wound itself is practically square in the middle of his chest, most likely a wound that would be fatal, and is thoroughly laced in poison. He reveals that he rearranged his organs, therefore protecting his heart. Inosuke also mentions that Gyutaro's poison has no effect on him due to his upbringing, which is very convenient, but hey, it is what it is. Then both Zenitsu and Inosuke decapitate Daki while Tanjiro beheads Gyutaro. However, Inosuke loses consciousness as Zenitsu remarks that his heartbeat is growing weaker and weaker. Tanjiro, Zenitsu, and Nezuko gather around Inosuke. Without many options, the trio are practically forced to watch their friend die. Thankfully, however, Nezuko saves him with her blood demon art. Inosuke regains consciousness. Afterwards, the three comrades face recovery once more. Out of the trio, Inosuke probably suffered the most as Aoi admits that he was on the verge of death. Miraculously, Inosuke is able to bounce back, even having the energy to crawl on the ceiling. He's overjoyed to see Tanjiro now awake, but also gloats that he woke up a week before. He tells Tanjiro that now he has poison resistance, something that Kyo explains by comparing Inosuke to a honey badger. This animal is a good comparison for Inosuke as both are equally aggressive. That being said, a week passes and Inosuke returns to the Demon Slayer business. And for Inosuke, things seem to return to normal until special Hashira training occurs. During this, the swordsmen of the Demon Slayer Corps are required to engage in each Hashira's specific training regimen. The training in general is grueling enough for most slayers to be exhausted, if not annoyed. However, Inosuke, like Tanjiro, sees the training as a means to improve himself further. And you know what, this training could not have come at a better time though, as shortly after, the Ubuyashiki mansion exploded, exposing a regenerating Muzan. Because of this attack, every capable Demon Slayer was sent a summons, including Inosuke. The Demon Nakime, upper rank 4, summons the Infinity Castle, and Inosuke finds himself within. And he presumably runs around the complex slaying demons until his crow leads him to Kanao and Doma. Yet again, he has a rather dramatic entrance, crashing through the ceiling. He cuts through Doma's wave of ice shards, saving Kanao. This battle, like all other fights in the arc, are fights to the death, but they also serve as themes. This very fight is where Inosuke finally regains his sense of self and his humanity. Inosuke is enthusiastic to take on an upper rank, however, he soon learns a grim truth. Doma killed and absorbed Shinobu. Inosuke is greatly angered and shocked by this, and he has a flashback with her. The flashback seems meaningless at first, it's only Shinobu making a pinky promise with Inosuke, but it does show how Inosuke thinks of others. His first thought of Shinobu is a memory of the pinky promise. He remembers something surprisingly soft about the insect Hashira. That being said, an outraged Inosuke charged toward Doma. Being upper rank though, Doma dodged this. He comments on Inosuke's messed up technique and his iconic chipped swords. But this attack by Inosuke isn't all for naught, as he is able to return Kanao's sword. Once more, Inosuke dislocates his joints in order to slash Doma across the eyes. But during this, Doma is able to steal Inosuke's mask without either slayer noticing. Now unmasked, Doma comments that Inosuke's face is familiar. Doma asks if Inosuke had met him before, to which Inosuke angrily denies. Now in order to remember, Doma pierces his own skull with his finger, swirling around his brain as he recovers a memory from 15 years ago. He recalls Kotoha, Inosuke's mother, and her tragic story. As stated before, she fled from the Paradise Faith cult and was eventually killed by Doma. Doma states Inosuke's face is the same as hers. Clearly, Inosuke rebuffs this, saying that he has no mother and he was raised by boars. Doma is amused by this, commenting, "You're human, so a human must have given birth to you." Not only does this shatter Inosuke's worldview, but he's also forced to confront his painful past and his mother's killer. Inosuke tries to charge the demon but is knocked into the pond by Doma. The upper rank continues the story, recanting that he wasn't going to eat Kotoha originally. He also mentions the Pinky Promise song she sang to Inosuke. This causes Inosuke to connect the warmth he felt of Shinobu's Pinky Promise with that of his mother's song. Doma finishes his tale, stating that Kotoha's life was meaningless. Inosuke then readies himself to attack Doma once more, stating that just cutting off your head won't be enough. I'm gonna send you to hell. At long last, Inosuke not only remembers his mom, but is able to confront the demon who killed her. Doma continues to taunt Inosuke, but realizes that Akaza has been defeated. He no longer has time to toy with the Slayers, so instead, Doma creates ice dolls to fight the swordsmen. As he leaves, Doma tells Kanao and Inosuke the dolls are as strong as him. But before he leaves the scene, Doma notices Inosuke isn't breathing in the icy air. He notes that this is most likely due to how sensitive Inosuke's skin is, that he can detect even the slightest chill. Intrigued by him, Doga decides to force Inosuke to use all his techniques, as the knowledge will aid him in further battles. He creates another doll which slashes an already wounded Inosuke. However, just as Doma prepares to leave, his face begins to melt. Kanao realizes that Shinobu's poison is working and resolves to not let her death mean nothing. In a desperate attempt, Doma uses his blood demon art, Rhyme, Water Lily Barazatva, to create a giant ice figure. This technique engulfs the room, knocking away Inosuke and Kanao. The two slayers again go in to attack Doma, but Inosuke is grabbed. Kanao continues her charge, activating the final form of flower breathing. Unfortunately, she is frozen by Doma just as she reaches him. Inosuke though sees this and uses his sword to act as leverage so Kanao is able to behead Doma. Successfully, the two swordsmen behead Doma together, and afterwards Inosuke stomps the ground where Doma disintegrated, yelling insults. His wounds end up stopping this, however, as the Slayer falls dizzy to the ground. He remembers a conversation with Tanjiro and Zenitsu. Inosuke had been yelling about his lack of a mother, to which Tanjiro tells him that everyone has a mother. Regardless though, Inosuke responds by saying that his mother abandoned him, which meant he wasn't wanted. Zenitsu butts in, however. He says that if Inosuke's mom didn't care about him, she wouldn't have given him a name. This bittersweet memory seems to only enforce the love Kotoha felt for Inosuke. He was her pride and joy, enough so that she died for him. Remembering his mother, Inosuke begins to cry. As said before, this fight is not only to the death, but also signifies Inosuke regaining who he is. He not only remembers his mother, but realizes that he was indeed loved, that he wasn't just an unruly boy raised in the wild. Later, Kanao is seen carrying the injured Inosuke as they promptly run into Zenitsu and Murata. Zenitsu, Inosuke, and Kanao join in the fight against Muzan. They attempt a sneak attack, but are swiftly thwarted by the demon progenitor. Despite this, they continue their assault on Muzan. However, Inosuke is not unconscious by rubble. He regains consciousness and tearfully berates Muzan for killing his fellow core members. Alongside Zenitsu, he once again attacks Muzan, suffering more wounds in the process. Muzan eventually knocks Inosuke back with a shockwave, but stands his ground. Inosuke continues to fight alongside Tanjiro and Zenitsu, but is eventually knocked away again by Muzan's whip. The fight continues as Inosuke is unconscious until Muzan is seemingly defeated. Inosuke is then seen biting a Kakushi who is attempting to help him, all while coughing up blood. Even with his serious wounds, Inosuke maintains his fighting spirit. But from there, Tanjiro turns into a demon, much to his friend's dismay. Inosuke tries to remind Tanjiro that they are his friends, but his pleas fall on deaf ears. Instead, Tanjiro leaps forward to attack Inosuke. Inosuke does prepare to return the favor and attack Tanjiro, but thinks back to sharing food with him, which unnerves him. Inosuke realizes that he can't cut down his own friend and prepares to die instead. However, Nezuko stops Tanjiro, embracing him. Inosuke and Zenitsu race forward to help Nezuko as a demon Tanjiro rampages. Inosuke hits Tanjiro on the head repeatedly, telling him to snap out of it, but is flung back by Tanjiro. Ultimately, the scene seems grim and unwinnable until Kanao arrives and uses the final form of flower breathing to inject medicine into Tanjiro. Tanjiro is freed from Muzan's control, which causes Inosuke to cry and rejoice alongside the other Slayers. 3 months later, Inosuke is seen sleeping at the foot of Tanjiro's bed alongside Zenitsu. Later on, he sneaks into the kitchen as Aoi is cooking. She catches him trying to sneak food and offers him a plate of food instead, telling him to stop stealing. While eating, Inosuke muses to himself how quickly Aoi caught him, wondering if she's strong. Sometime after this, he helps pay his respects to the gravesite at the Butterfly Mansion, which is a great comparison to his early beginnings in the story when he didn't have much regard for the dead. And once finished, the 4 comrades made their way to the old Kamado house. They began their new, peaceful life there, presumably growing happily into old age. But finally, in the distant future, Inosuke's descendant with Aoi is Aoba Hashibira, and he is a well-known botanist studying the blue spider lily. And if you remember, the blue spider lily is the very same flower that Muzan was searching for the sake of overcoming the sun, but ultimately disregarded because of Nezuko. And crazy enough, a mistake in his research resulted in the flowers dying. And now, like his ancestor, Aoba wishes to live alone in the mountains. And with that, this has been the entire life of Inosuke, who is probably my favorite character in the entire series. Not only is he headstrong, but he cares deeply for his teammates, and his fight against Doma is a complete masterpiece. I am a complete sucker for characters rediscovering and or losing their own humanity, and so Inosuke is just fantastic all around. And it would be fantastic of you to subscribe to Plot Armor with notifications on, because when it comes to bringing you some of the best Demon Slayer content on the platform, Plot Armor has you covered. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.